A lot to unpack here in this news that's been breaking in the last couple of days, it feels like. John Tamny is here to help us better understand this. Director of the Center of Economic Freedom and Freedom Works, also editor, RealClearMarkets. Welcome to the show. Well, what's clear is that it's not clear. It's the opposite of clear what's going on, because even the new CEO that's now taken over the former FTX says there are way more questions than there are answers to. John, let's get your reaction to what happened in the last 24 hours. He's been arrested, he's been denied bail, and he was supposed to testify today in D.C. Okay, we've got some technical difficulties here. We're going to take a quick break here, and we're going to come back in just a moment. Back to the story we talked about earlier on the crypto world and FTX. John Tamny is back with us. He's a director for the Center of Economic Freedom at Freedom Works, also editor at RealClearMarkets. Welcome back to the show, and I apologize for the technical difficulties. One thing that we were talking about earlier was the fact that what's clear is that things are not clear because there are still more questions than there are answers to. Let me first get your reaction to his arrest and also what appears to be a failed bail attempt, and I don't know where we go from here.
I don't like the optics of an arrest. Let's never forget that in any big advance in commercially, whether it was automobiles 100 years ago, whether it was the internet roughly at the beginning of the late 20th century, beginning of the 21st, there's always massive failure in the sector. And that is a growth spasm. Some will call it bubble. They're incorrect. It's a growth spasm that produces information on the way to what is innovative becoming common. And so my expectation always was, I've got columns showing this, that there's going to be massive failure in the crypto space. Why are we handcuffing people like this? Why is government being empowered at this time? I would rather we find out what went wrong and ask questions rather than put people in jail.
Well, he's under arrest. He's been denied bail. There's an expectation that he will be extradited from the Bahamas to the U.S. mainland for obviously questioning and to face question marks from the Justice Department. I mean, today they unveiled a number of very serious allegations. I mean, these are very, very serious. Wire fraud, defrauding investors. These are all the things that whether you're part of the mainstream media or not part of the mainstream media, that we've always frowned upon, that are serious, serious misgivings of people in the investment community. When they take money from you, they have a fiduciary responsibility to be a good caretaker of those funds. And these are very serious accusations. I'm not saying I'm going to justify his arrest, but there has to be accountability, doesn't there?
Yeah, but there always is accountability in the marketplace. Let's never forget a couple of things, that in order to be an investor in this kind of concept, you have to have a certain net worth. You can't just be anyone. These are big boys investing in these companies precisely because most of them will fail. If you look at Silicon Valley today, 9 out of 10 startups fail, and that's always been the norm. If you, again, you go back to the early 20th century, thousands of car companies were incorporated, most of them failed. That FTX failed shouldn't surprise us with this in mind. Does that mean he should go to prison? Is it investor defraud, or is it just another failed business? And let me be clear, I've got no association with FTX. I don't know Sam Bankman-Fried, but it concerns me when government gets to play the big shot here and start putting people behind bars in a new sector that, of course, was going to be defined by lots of bankruptcy.
Well, let me just clarify. He's been arrested, likely to be questioned. He has not been convicted, and there's no plan to put him in, long-term prison. I mean, this is a, how do I say it? They said that he was a potential flight risk. Now, we might disagree with that, but this is the Bohemian and the Bahamas. It is their authorities at work. Let me switch very slightly here. You mentioned on the regulatory front, and the crypto began because it was, I don't want to use the word anti-regulatory, but it was regulatory free, and that was the sort of the incentive that people say, well, I love crypto because it's not regulated and that's why I want to buy it. But now you're starting to hear people who are invested in crypto saying, wait a minute, there should be some regulation to protect the little guy. And I know you're talking about the institutional investors, but I know lots of people who are regular folks with regular incomes, some with no incomes, and they were invested in a lot of these crypto investments, and I'm sure they would have something very different to say about this.
Well, the first thing I'd say is if you're buying a currency as a speculation, then you're probably misunderstanding the purpose of money in the first place. Historically, money is very quiet. It's a measure that enables the exchange of actual wealth. And so you're probably going down the wrong track in the first place. As far as regulation more broadly, something tells me that investors who have big investments in these companies are regulating them pretty heavily right now in the aftermath of FTX, all of which raises a question. Isn't government regulation at this point a bit superfluous? We're asking those who could never get a job at an internet company or an investment bank or, yes, a crypto company to oversee those who could. What could government regulators have seen that would have caused them to notice something amiss at FTX? And if you say they might have noticed something, well, why didn't they? FTX was in bed with just about every major politician and certainly lots of Democratic politicians. Why did they not notice this?
I will certainly not defend FTX, but just a bit of background. He was based in Hong Kong for the longest time, and he moved his operations to the Bahamas. He was not under a regulatory structure of the United States. Where he made the mistake was, the quote, defrauding investors, taking money in the U.S. as investors, and that's where the question mark lies. But the actual operations of his exchange was not regulated by any government.
Well, no, it wasn't. But again, I'm asking the question once again, what would they have done? What we know is that regardless of his location, he was heavily involved with U.S. politicians handing out all sorts of money. And so do you think they were going to sound the alarm? And assuming there was alarm, tell me the politician that would have understood a nascent industry in such a way that he or she could have said, oh, FTX is actually the one badly at work, or
right. You are referring to the tens of millions that was donated to the Republican Party and the Democratic Party from both Sam Bankman-Friedman and other executives. Now, by the way, that was done in 2022. Those donations were done, and again, I'm not defending him. I just want to make it very clear, which I'm sure you appreciate, that this was very recent history. What would you tell people who say, I do want to be invested in cryptocurrency, and I think it's a good idea to be in cryptocurrency? Or would you say that this is a good space for them to put your money? Because I understand where you come from on the regulatory front, but we're still talking about people's livelihoods and their money and their investment here that I think is fair it be protected in some way, shape, or form.
Well, not to talk my book, but my new book, The Money Confusion, argues that crypto is the future. And I argue it's the future precisely because there's been this correction. The correction is a signal of a maturing market pushing out the bad. Now, what I would tell a small investor is that if you're getting into this because you want to make money on money, get out right away. Because money, if it's good, is not a speculation. It's a stable measure of value. So if you're just doing this because you think something's going to go up, get out right away, because nothing goes up forever. Now, again, more broadly, going back to this regulatory concept, if regulators could see what was going to fail, they wouldn't work as regulators, they'd work as venture capitalists, because they could make a lot more money doing that. But as we've seen, some of the best venture capitalists in the United States invested heavily in this and have experienced enormous losses. So this idea that regulators could have done a better job than investors with actual skin in the game is the triumph of illogic, but it's the triumph of hope over endless decades and centuries of experience.
All right, John,
investors are the ultimate regulator.
I'm not going to pitch your book because you just did, so I'll let that stand. Look, I really enjoy these debates and discussions. I think deep down you do want to protect, obviously, the investors. I think it's just about how we go about it, right? So appreciate it. From Real Clear Markets, John Tamny, thank you very much. Next up on